interpretation, and one likely to prejudice the jury against him when they actually voted on the charges, the official charges that were lodged against him. And so we're on about 24b2, and he has reached the end of what he described as defending himself against the early charges or the early accusations. And he will now go and talk about, or at least discuss the new charges, as we call them. And we already were introduced to them in Euthyphro, that those are charges of corrupting the youth and believing in new gods or inventing new gods while not believing in the old gods. That was sort of a clumsy way of saying that he was a heretic. In fact, I think I'll use the term heresy because heresy is sort of another way of saying having non-standard religious practices, particularly when there are authorized and official religious practices that are pretty much required by either a powerful religion or by the state, if the state and religion are in cahoots with each other. So those charges occur there about 24b, about b6 or so. Socrates is clearly corrupting the young, not believing in the gods of whom the city believes in, but other new divinities, such as their charge. Let's examine it point by point. And what he does to examine these charges, and he will examine them one by one, is he cross-examines Meletus. He's much more in his element when he's doing that rather than giving a long speech. And so because Meletus is required to answer, being one of the prosecutors at such a time, that's where they're going to go with it. And at about C6, he says, "Come here and tell me, Meletus, surely you consider it of the greatest importance that young men be as good as possible. Come then, tell the jury who improves them." And remember that the charge against Socrates is corrupting the youth. So Socrates is making the assumption, seems like a reasonable, logical assumption, if they can be improved, or if they can be corrupted, then they can also be improved. If they're capable of being changed in one way, unless they're already perfect, they're capable of being changed in another way, being made better. So he starts off, instead of defending himself against the charge, he's trying to sort of explore the charge more carefully and explore the charge maybe with a mind to showing that Meletus really doesn't quite know what he's talking about in this charge, and that maybe the charge itself is just a bunch of hot air. So he says, who improves the youth? And Meletus finally there at 24e, E1 says, well, the laws. Now, this is another problem with Socrates asking a who question and getting a what answer. And so he quickly says, all right, what people who may have knowledge of the laws improve the youth? And so Meletus says, the jurymen, all men in the jury, 501 people. And I guess that's fairly good. How do you mean, Meletus? Are these able to educate the young and improve them? Certainly. All of them, or some, but not others. All of them. And so Socrates is rather astonished. And the reason he's astonished is really at two levels. First of all, if Meletus is saying that all the 501 members of the jury improve the youth, you have to think, first of all, about, one, what constitutes improving the youth? How do we understand how a person improves the youth? And second of all, how does Meletus have that kind of knowledge of the 501 people there in the jury? It's clear he doesn't know them at all very well. It's clear that he probably has only met a handful of them. And yet, if we're going to say that improving youth or corrupting youth, either one, is really a character assessment, then you have to ask, how does Meletus know the characters of these 501 people? And I think the answer is he doesn't. He has no idea, except for a very few people, what these people are like. And yet what he's saying is every one of them, 501 people, improve the youth, make them better. And whether he has witnessed it, which of course he hasn't, whether he can somehow read their character from looking at their togas or whatever the hell it is, I have no idea. But one thing we do know is that he's making this kind of a claim, and Socrates is, I suppose, finding it preposterous. And second of all, because he is making that claim, Socrates is saying, okay, let's see how far he'll go with this. Because Socrates immediately believes, at least it would seem to me, that a claim that all the jurymen improved the youth of Athens seems quite, like I said, preposterous. For one thing, the jury's chosen at random, chosen by lot. And so there's no way you can sort of cherry pick having only the great improvers of the youth in a given jury. In the given jury, it's going to be a random cross-section of citizens, and yet for some reason, he may have hit the mother lode there and gotten all improvers of the youth in this jury. Pretty improbable. So he said, very good by Herod. You mentioned a great abundance of benefactors. But what about the audience? Do they improve the young as well? They do too. The audience. Now, anybody can wander in there. And, maybe some, drunk off the street was just trying to get a place to lay down and sleep it off that day. But he improves the youth because he's in the audience. All the audience members improve the youth. Wonderful. Okay. But what about members of the council? The counselors also. Now, the members of the council are politicians. Now, there haven't been too many politicians that improved the youth. Okay, there was that youth in the Oval Office with Bill Clinton, but that, I'm not certain that that was a matter of improvement at all. But the counselors were elected representatives who were there sort of as advisors to the assembly. The assembly was all assembled citizens of Athens. And so the counselors, all the counselors improved the youth. Great. And the assembly, how about the assembly mellitus? Do members of the assembly corrupt the young, or do they all improve them? They improve them. So the assembly is all the citizens of Athens, all the male citizens who have the qualification to be a citizen. So it ends up that no matter what group of people Socrates mentions, and he's mentioning an ever wider and wider number of people, all of them improve the youth. And as he says now, all the Athenians, it seems, make the young into fine, good men, except me. And I alone corrupt them. Is that what you mean? That is most definitely what I mean. So at this point, we have sort of, I think of the defense against this first charge of corrupting youth happening in three parts. We just finished the first part. It's sort of the who improves the youth part. And where Socrates, once he recognizes how foolish Mellitus is going to be, is just going to let him be more and more foolish, more and more preposterous, and just let the jury see for themselves that this is what he's saying, that Socrates alone corrupts the youth, and everybody else in Athens, this is about 250,000 people, everybody else improves the youth. And it's amazing, first of all, if this is true, why is there a problem with the youth? It would seem as if everybody's in there improving youth and only one person is corrupting youth. This old part of 70, by the way, how can this possibly, how can there possibly be a problem with the youth to the extent that there needs to be this person brought to trial and put away or killed? Because, so Socrates seems to me is just laying this, as I said, bizarre claim of Mellitus is out there and hopes that the jury will understand it. But he has to take another step. And the step he takes now, the second part of his defense, is using a metaphor, using an analogy to try to reinforce how preposterous the claims of Mellitus are. So it's really answering the same thing, the sort of who improves the youth, who corrupts the youth question. But he's doing it in a different way. He has the, what I'm calling the horse trainer analogy, or the horse breeder analogy, whatever you want to call it. I sort of call it horse trainer for some reason. And that starts around 25b1. You condemn me to a great misfortune. Tell me, does this also apply to horses, do you think? That all men improve them and only one individual corrupts them. So he's taking this general principle that everybody improves them and only one person corrupts them. He says, well, what about horses? So when you want to get your horse trained, if you want to get your horse taken care of, you want your horse to be better off, do you let everybody have a shot at the horse? Just, invite the whole city in to train the horse? Or do you find one person who knows what they're doing, knows what they're talking about, and you say, get all the rest of these people out of here. I just want, you take care of business, train the horse. Which one is more likely, he is saying, in your experience, he's talking to the jury. Most of the jury members know how important it is to have well-trained horses. And as a result, he is saying, isn't it, he's sort of implying, isn't it more, according to our common understanding and our common experience, that you need just one person who knows what they're doing to really make a difference in this case, the horse, And if you just let everybody at random come in and try to train the horse, it would be horrible. It would be a terrible situation and wouldn't happen. So this is sort of a horse trainer analogy, an attempt for Socrates to show the jury by an example that they would all understand how ridiculous the way in which Meletus is arguing it is. I'll give you an example from my own life, and that's why I have a 7-iron with me, not just because I feel that, you know, that feel that maybe the snow will melt one of these days. But I'm not in enough shape that I actually go to the wall and say, hey, we may have some old, you know. But, so let me, back when I was unemployed, and which I will be soon, back when I was unemployed, I got part-time job, temp work. Probably some of you have done that. Maybe some of you are already doing that. You know, great sympathy for it. But one summer, summer of 1998, I think, I got a job, a part-time job, just on weekends as a technical representative, tech rep, for McGregor Golf. Unfortunately, I have Wilson's here, but I use my dad's old clubs. I like to keep around. But I actually have a pretty good swing. And I think I actually hit the ball on occasion. And not too bad, really. So I got hired, and they paid me $100 a day to go out to country clubs and lug about 3 big bags of new clubs. And let the old geezers, at that time I was a young geezer, let the old geezers hit with these new clubs, you know, graphite shafted clubs and all that kind of stuff. And I just sit there, I don't have to sell them anything. I just, count the clubs, make sure they don't, take one away and put it in their bag for themselves. It was a great time. And then when nobody was out there, I got to hit many buckets of balls as the country club would allow. And went to good clubs, like Lakewood River Country Club and Loch Lloyd down in South Kansas City. Really hot shot clubs. Had a lot of fun. Leewood South. So at the same time, that was 1998. That was when Tiger Woods burst on the scene. And one of my grandsons, Mikey, played all kinds of sports. He was, at that time, he was about 10 years old. Played football, baseball, everything, basketball. Great athlete. Really is still a good athlete. Get a little back, not great athletes. But so he decided, Tiger Woods suddenly became his hero. He wants to learn how to play golf. And so I said, hey, I know how to play golf. I'll teach you. So I had a summer project with just Mikey when he was out of school. We went out there, and he lived close to Parade Park, so I went to Parade Park. We found a place, actually sort of close to the Charlie Parker statue. We went to a place there, and I taught him how to swing, what the grip, stance, everything with the balls. Had a good time. And by the end of the summer, we got together and bonded a lot more as grandson and grandfather, and just had a good time. So I'm going to use that example and say that maybe let's pretend that that's now, and let's pretend that Mikey wants to learn to play golf. And I got a club here, and I've got all of you too. Do you think you can improve his game? And how many here play golf, first of all? Sometimes. You have, okay, but you're not sort of an expert or anything like that? Okay, well, that doesn't matter, because if Meletus is right, hey, Mikey, come on in. You all looked at the door, okay. Mikey's coming in, of course, but I'd invite him in, 10-year-old kid, eager and enthusiastic, and if Meletus is right, I just say, okay, all of you, just clear the chairs away, all of you, go ahead, improve his game, teach him how to play. Okay? And if Meletus is right, you do a lot better job than I do. Mainly because, everybody improves the youth, and, only this one corrupt philosopher, not the only one in the room, I think, only this one corrupt philosopher corrupts the youth. And so, if Meletus is right, you can teach Mikey a lot better than I can. So we can have him all in here. And so you can probably guess that you wouldn't have, too much success. Even if Jack knows a little bit about it, you're all supposed to be equal participants here. You're all supposed to improve the youth. So you might say, no, you hold it like this, Mikey. Or, hold it like that. It could be anything. No, hold this in. It's got a handle on it. See, can't you see? It's the handle. You tap like a blind man. So there are any number of things you can do, but one of the things you ain't going to do is improve his game. And I think Socrates would, in some way, rolling his eyes in his head, approve of my example at the sense that it certainly is another way of explaining the same problem. That nearly anything you want to have done and done well, you need somebody who knows what they're talking about, knows what they're doing, and you're better off trusting one person who is experienced and able than just letting everybody have a try at something that's important. If it's really important, this is something you shouldn't just leave to any random people in the world. Now, this is also a parallel. One of Socrates' criticisms of democracy. He thinks governing, running a country, is too important to be left in the hands of amateurs, and we're all believing amateurs. And his view was, find people who know what they're doing. Find people who are skilled at governing and let them govern. The philosopher king idea. Not only would they be skilled, because they could think very clearly, they also wouldn't be self-interested, so you can trust them to be honest and things like that. So that there are a couple of things happening here with the horse trainer analogy, or with the whole who improves the youth thing. It's sort of an inherent criticism of, you might say, mob anything. Mob politics, mob teaching, mob anything. Trust people who know what they're doing. Don't trust everybody, because most people don't, most people have their head up their butts. So that's sort of the end of the second element of his defense against the first charge, the charge of corrupting the youth. And so he's just tried in two ways to refute, or at least call into question, the claims of Meletus, the claim that only Socrates corrupted the youth and everybody else improves the youth. He hopes that by this example, and then just the questioning before it, he will have shown that this is, as I say, something of a preposterous thing. Now his last, or his third attempt at defending against this charge is, I think, the best. Not that the first two were not good, but this is more, let's say, a logically scrupulous kind of a thing. Then this starts down there at about 25C5. And by Zeus Meletus, tell us whether it's better for a man to live among good or wicked fellow citizens. Answer, my good man, for I'm not asking a difficult question. Do not the wicked do some harm to those who are ever closest to them, where good people benefit them? Certainly, says Meletus. Now what we've got here is the beginning of a set of questions that Socrates asked Meletus. And Meletus provides the answers. Because Meletus is providing the answers, this is really Meletus' argument. It's an argument that Meletus is sort of giving all the affirmative claims. Yes, this is true. Yes, this is true. Yes, this is what happens. And so what he will do is essentially construct this argument basically out of the claims that Meletus is affirming and show how the argument doesn't work. I'm going to try to do the same thing. I'll do it in much more strict and logical, and I'll do it in symbolic form just to annoy you, which I hope it will. And so we'll see how this particular argument works out. So let's continue on and look at the questions. There really are about three questions that Meletus answers that will be sort of the core claims of the argument. And does a man exist who would rather be harmed than benefited by his associates? Answer, my good man, for the law orders you to answer. Is there any man who wants to be harmed? Of course not. Come now, do you accuse me here of corrupting the young and making them worse deliberately or unwillingly? Deliberately. Now, we'll stop here and let's put this argument together. I think what we have here are essentially a three-premise argument, actually two arguments in tandem or piggybacking one another. Okay, so let's identify the claims first of all. X, some person X. Are there people who voluntarily associate with the wicked? Meletus says at least some sort of a claim, that at least we can make that as something of a statement, as a part of his argument. So that's going to be me. Q is going to be another person X. This X, obviously, in Meletus' terms, is going to be Socrates. But the way Socrates asked the question, X could be anybody. In fact, Socrates asked it as sort of a general information. Does anybody do that? Is this the way everybody is? That kind of a thing. Now, it'll all be applied to Socrates, but he's trying to use general claims that he believes apply to everybody and have Meletus affirm them. Consenting to being harmed. Now, even though Meletus says this doesn't happen, we can put it up there as a claim and we can negate it, which is an important thing to be able to do. And then finally, R, which is of course the pirate claim. R. Mr. X, not his real name. I'm using the term wicked because that's sort of what the translation that George Grube has, and so I'll stick with that. But these are, I think, the three basic premises of this little set of questions and answers that Socrates and Meletus engage. Now let's look at the argument as I'm trying to sort of reproduce the argument in a way that we can understand it from previous things we did. So let's look at the argument. Premise one, if P then Q, trying to give you some comfort here, a little familiarity premise. If P then Q, if someone voluntarily associates with the wicked, then they are consenting to being harmed, because since you voluntarily associate with the wicked, and you know that the wicked harm those who associate with them, then you're consenting to the very harm that's going to befall you. That's exactly the way Socrates has sort of led, and very much did lead the witness, very much led Meletus into making that claim. So, if P then Q, that works out very well, the second premise. However, Meletus is asked, does anybody voluntarily, do you want to be harmed? Does anybody consent to being harmed? And he says, no, of course not. Okay? Not Q. We already have the beginning of, I hope, a familiar argument form. And so the conclusion, which will also really be the premise, it's going to do here. Then the conclusion is, well, then nobody voluntarily associates with the wicked. If you know ahead of time that it's going to happen, if you know ahead of time that you're going to be harmed, and nobody wants to be harmed, then you're not going to associate with the wicked. It's real simple and sort of just straightforward. But we got more to go. That's really 4, and get to the next one. It is if R, then Q. R, arrow Q. If you make someone wicked, in other words, if you are the cause of someone being bad, then same thing, you consent to being harmed. If you're the cause of someone being wicked, then you know very well all the things that have gone before, that if you make someone, or if you're around someone who is wicked, then the wickedness will cause bad things to happen to you. Now this only just says you're the one who's causing it, but it doesn't really matter when it comes to Q. It doesn't matter whether you're the one who's causing it or whether the people were already wicked before you got there, that if you knew these things ahead of time, either you knew they were bad or you made them bad, then you essentially are consenting to being harmed. You're consenting to the harm that will inevitably come to you if Meletus is right, if the Meletus argument is any good. Therefore, in this premise, we have to reassert not Q. We reassert not Q for a couple of reasons. One is that's sort of what Meletus said. And the second thing is, if we're going to have this as one long argument, and I do believe it is sort of one long argument, then any time Q is used alone, it must be the same thing. If it's negated here, it's got to be negated here. You can't have a bare premise of Q unnegated, or then you have two contradictory premises, this and that. So this premise is clean because these two are the same, and then you can probably see that the conclusion here is R. Now, before we go into a little more analysis of it, let's make certain we know what we see here. And one of the things we see is, I'm hoping you can see, but this is a modus ponens. modus tollens is a valid argument form.
So how is making someone wicked consenting to being harmed?
Hmm?
How does number 4 work again?
Number 4? Oh,
Premise one.
well, okay, if you make someone wicked, then you are consenting to being harmed, because
How
in
are you
making
being
someone
harmed?
wicked, you are making them a source of harm. You know, when you make
So
someone
they're
wicked,
going to harm you after they're...
yeah, after they become wicked. And so, that's why P and R are a little different. This one is hanging out with people who are already wicked. This is making them wicked and then hanging out with them. Yeah. The very fact that you do make them wicked means that you are at a point where you at least are getting a little bit of blowback from their wickedness, which means that you are, in fact, consenting to being harmed. Yeah. Now, this also is a modus tollens, I hope you can see. I know you're only used to if P then Q modus tollens. But remember, modus tollens is, in its strict structural form, it's if antecedent then consequent. Not consequent, therefore not antecedent. Now, it just turns out in this particular conditional, the antecedent is R and not P. Doesn't matter. If antecedent, then consequent. Not consequent, therefore not antecedent. That's the basic structure of modus tollens. If we did a modus tollens, it would be the same thing. It doesn't matter what it is per se. You can have, often you can have things like that where you have more than 2 variables, more than 2 claims, and we can sort of work them out to see which one is there and which one is not there. So this is a really nice modus tollens. Now we got the problem. The problem is, I'm calling this, we don't have a red marker. Do we have a red marker? Well, use a green marker instead. The problem with this is supposed to be Mellitus' argument. But Mellitus is not arguing to this conclusion. See what the conclusion here is, therefore X doesn't make someone wicked. X is Socrates. Mellitus is saying, yeah, he does make him wicked. I mean, Socrates corrupts the youth. That's sort of someone corrupts the youth or makes people wicked. And so Mellitus needs the argument to end as R. This would be the Mellitus argument would end in the conclusion R. Now he buys into all the rest of it here. But then he suddenly wants it to be R at the conclusion. And if he's buying into the way Socrates has rather cleverly structured the argument, and I have cleverly sort of restructured it for Socrates, and because he has bought into this little sequence, he suddenly doesn't want this conclusion. But I'm sorry, pal, I would have to say, if you buy the sequence, you've got to buy the conclusion that follows. But he wants to buy this whole sequence and then come up with his own conclusion, which is a conclusion which is not indicated by the argument.
So the only way you can say that Socrates is corrupting youth is that because he's already said that the only way basically anyone could corrupt youth is if they were doing it involuntarily. And he's already said that Socrates is already doing it deliberately.
Yeah, he's already said Socrates is not doing it involuntarily. He is doing it intentionally. Because any of these things might sort of say, well, maybe it's sort of involuntary. It's not really, it's accidental. You didn't know you were doing it, it just happened, and now, terrible things are happening to you. It's all unwilling. But from the very beginning, Mellitus is talking about this is an agenda of Socrates to corrupt youth. He's doing it intentionally, and Socrates, in leading this argument, is offering Mellitus an out, offering a chance to say, well, I didn't do it deliberately, this is not intentionally. But the argument that Mellitus is agreeing to is all about, you know what's happening. You know what happened here, you know what happens here, you know what's happening here, you're doing it. Mellitus is, or let's say Socrates is setting up an argument to see whether Mellitus, which direction is it going to go? Are you going to say this was unintentional, accidental, I'm just a dubious old man, this is what happened, or is this something I had been deviously and cleverly intending to do and following through to do? This is the argument for devious intending and following through, up through premise 5, that Mellitus agrees to. But he doesn't want this conclusion, he wants this conclusion. And it just doesn't work. If you're going to accept the argument up to the conclusion, you got to accept the conclusion that the argument leads to, or else you're not being logical, and certainly not being rational. You're just sort of pulling stuff out of your butt. And so I think that this is a particularly effective way for Socrates to argue or show how the claims of Meletus are implausible. The first part of the claim was implausible. Who improves the youth? He tried to point out that kind of implausibility. Now we have another way of pointing out implausibility, that he wants everything to work out so that this was intentional. And yet the argument itself has premises that shows this isn't what people do. People don't do this intentionally. But somehow Socrates did it intentionally. And the argument is structured so that it shows that if you're going to try to make an argument for intentional corruption, corruption one, book 'em, Dano, if that's what it is, then in using this argument, you can't get there. You've got to find some other way to get there. And it isn't something that apparently Meletus is particularly good at. So this is the third of the three ways in which Socrates gets Meletus to present his reasons for the charge of corrupting youth, and also Socrates tries to show that the reasons and the charges themselves are bogus. So that's just the first charge. We still got one more charge, and I will use blue for the next charge. Yeah. Next, we have the charge of not believing in the gods of the city, but inventing new gods and having other gods that he has worshipped. Now, one thing that makes this, you might say, the whole atmosphere around this charge different from the atmosphere around the charge of corrupting the youth is that Socrates, I'm guessing, and I really think most scholars agree with this, that Socrates knew he was guilty of this charge. I mean, they had him dead to rights on that, because that's what he did. He, according to the language of the deposition, he did in fact not agree that all the gods of the city and only the gods of the city are to be worshipped, but that all gods should be worshipped because all gods are gods and worthy of being worshipped. So in fact, he was, let's call it a heretic. So we're going to call heresy the second charge. He was guilty. So what do if you are guilty of a charge, but you try to beat the charge? Well, other than getting a good lawyer, actually Socrates had probably one of the best lawyers, so that was pretty good in itself. But what you do is you sort of, let's say, deflect attention from the charge onto something else. And that's what he does. And it does it rather cleverly. And so let's see what he does. And then show how both Meletus and Socrates want to argue this particular charge, because they have two very different ways of arguing the second charge. So let's look at it. This is just a little before 26c, about 26b, 5 or 6. Then by those very gods about whom we are talking, Meletus, make this clearer to me in the jury. I cannot be sure whether you mean that I teach the belief that there are some gods, and therefore I myself believe that there are gods, and I'm not altogether an atheist. Now, the term atheist, never been around before. This is the first time it's been mentioned in this trial. Rather odd thing. And one of the reasons why it's an odd thing to be mentioned is the charge of atheism was much more serious than the charge of heresy. I mean, it's sort of the view that if you have non-standard religious practices, at least you're still religious, and maybe we can sort of shape you up, pull your thumbs out by their nails for a while. That'll sort of, do something to help you get your religious fervor back. But if you're an atheist, you're beyond help. I mean, that's bad. Much worse a charge. It's a much worse charge, a much more serious thing, and a jury would not take lightly any claim of atheism, where they might be a little more lenient on the charge of, well, he doesn't like some gods, but he likes too many of them. Let's see, we can get him sort of whittle back the number of gods he worships. That'll be okay. So at least you're worshiping gods if you're a heretic. If you're an atheist, you ain't worshiping anything, and you're a danger to the city. You're a danger to culture. You're a danger to everything. So here is Socrates saying, you're not calling me an atheist, are you? Sort of, why would he tempt the apparently slow-witted Meletus into saying, you don't want to call me an atheist, do you? Well, apparently he sure does. So let's consider that I'm not altogether an atheist, nor am I guilty of that. Not, however, the gods in whom the city believes, but others. That's the charge is the charge against me, that there are others. or whether you mean that I don't believe in any gods at all, and that's what I teach others. And Malthus jumps at the atheist charge. Oh yeah, now we've got it. If I can prove to the jury he's an atheist, he is dead meat. It's over for Socrates. But he said, that's what I mean. You don't believe in any gods at all. You're an atheist. You dirty one. Commie, something up there. Whatever it is, that's what he is. And so Meletus has sort of taken up the bait. Now, the great thing is, as long as they're going to focus on atheism, now Socrates is in his court. Because he knows, and he can prove that he's not an atheist. But if that's what Meletus wants to focus on, then Socrates has a chance on this one. If it was just about heresy, Socrates is saying, yeah, I guess you're right there. But now he is sort of led, I think rather cleverly or deviously, led Meletus into saying, you don't think I'm an atheist, do you? And Meletus, oh yeah, you are. Because Meletus figures, hey, he's got it. I mean, he can make the heavier charge stick, or at the very least, he can make the jury realize this guy is worse than we thought. He isn't just a heretic. He is somebody who doesn't believe in anything. He's the worst godless, commie, pinko Greek I ever saw, or something like that. So Meletus decides to do that, and they have this sort of an odd little discussion there. I'll just mention one thing because it has to do with something earlier in the course. And says, you're a strange fellow, Meletus. Why do you say this? Do I not believe, as other men do, that the sun and the moon are gods? And that's sort of what the standard belief was, that the sun and the moon, the fiery objects in the sky, were in fact gods. They were not just symbolizing gods. They actually were sort of embodiments of divinity up there. And here's what Meletus says. No, by Zeus, juryman, he says the sun is a stone and the moon earth. Now, this goes back to the first of the early accusations. He studies things in the heavens and under the earth. And the people, like Thales and Anaxagoras will be mentioned here, and Anaximander, some of the other early pre-Socratics, did believe, as they thought about, that the explanation that the sun and the moon were gods was just a little, they thought it was a little fishy. Well, unless you're a Pisces and everything's fishy, of course. But it was a little strange, and they believed that the sun and the moon were made out of pretty much something like matter, similar to the kind of matter that's here on the earth. And so their explanation is probably a lot better than the contemporary explanation. Eventually, Aristotle would have for a long time, the authoritative answer is that, well, yes, it is matter, but it's a different kind of matter out there in the out past the atmosphere. The matter that the stars are made of, that the sun is made of, the moons are made of, is a separate kind of matter. It's not the matter, energy, earth, air, fire, water that we have here, but it's a fifth kind of matter called a fifth essence or quintessence. So the term quintessence is a term that actually comes out of the Greek meaning for whatever things in the heavens are made of, because they're much more refined than what's here on the earth. But for the pre-Socratics, it was just that everything there up in the sky was just another form of matter, just in a slightly different way. And so Socrates, however, not being a pre-Socratic, but being sort of a religious person, is willing to say, yeah, the sun and the moon are gods. But because Meletus has it in his mind, here's a guy that is a philosopher, which means he's a philosopher and doesn't believe in all the kinds of stuff that we believe in, and he suddenly brings this idea out that Anaxagoras had, and gets us all sort of confused. Well, let's talk a little more about what the arguments are. There are two arguments that are implied here. I'm going to make them explicit, whereas I think you can understand that these are implied. And it has to do with atheism and whether a person is trustworthy. It has to do with, is belief a prerequisite for being morally trustworthy? And Meletus is counting on the view that the jury believes that if you're a religious person, then you're morally trustworthy. That, I mean, this is a view a lot of people have, probably, perhaps some of you, maybe many of you in this class have that view. It's a view my mother had. That my mother was a minister's wife, and when people would come to the house to get a handout, she would, first thing she'd ask is, are you saved? Are you a believer? And of course, eventually, if you're a hobo, you know what to say to the minister's wife. And of course, and then she lets you come in and steal the silverware. And eventually we end up buying stainless steel because all the silverware was disappearing with all the bums. But that was all she wanted to know. You know, and her argument was a Mellitus argument. I'll put the Mellitus argument up here. Here's what Mellitus believed. A believer actually believes, you know, in God. And then Q is, let's say, trustworthy. And he figures this is a kind of an argument that most of the jury will believe. Most of the jury were sort of God-fearing people of Athens. And so the argument is pretty simple. Premise one is, of course, our old friend, if P then Q. If you're a believer, then you're trustworthy. Simple as that. Now, what's he arguing about Socrates? He's saying Socrates is an atheist. Socrates is not a believer, not P. Therefore, Socrates is not trustworthy. Stream up, feeding the hemlock, whatever it takes. So that's the Mellitus argument. Is that a familiar argument? Have we seen it before? Do we know what it is, even though you've seen it before? Can you identify it? On places like an exam, for instance.
Denying the precedent? Or
Denying something.
yeah.
Denying the antecedent, correct. This is denying the antecedent. Was that a valid or an invalid argument? Invalid, yes, off of its head. So Mellitus's argument having to do with trustworthiness and atheism is an argument that the jury almost certainly would be sympathetic to. But unfortunately, we should not be sympathetic to it because it is essentially a corrupted argument. It's an invalid argument. And so that's not something that he is aware of. I'm sure the jury's not aware of it. I think Socrates is aware of it, and I'm hoping now that we're aware of it. Well, this is what Mellitus is arguing. What does Socrates want to argue about this whole charge of atheism and trustworthiness? You know, the connection, if any, between the two. And he's willing to, Socrates to a certain extent is willing to accept some kind of a causal connection between being morally upright and also being religiously, let's say, orthodox or something of that sort. But the problem with this argument, the problem with P, the premise P, is that you don't have to demonstrate anything. All you got to say is, yeah, I'm a believer, just like all those bums said to my mom, and that's all she wanted to know. I want to hear the words come out of your mouth. And that's all it is, and you come in and then, stuff your pockets full. That's not what she invited them to do, but that's what ended up, honestly, it did happen a whole lot. And so the problem with this argument is not just its form, but that the first premise there is a premise that can't be confirmed. You can't confirm the truth of it. There is no evidentiary status for it. If you're going to say that premise P is true, then you've got to have some way of producing evidence of that truth. That's the problem Socrates has. If anybody can say they're a believer, then that's all it takes, then belief is a pretty cheap commodity. So what does Socrates do? Well, he has a different argument. He believes that you do have to find some way, if you're going to make a claim, you have to establish the claim. You can't just make the claim and say, well, I'm pulling this out of my butt, you don't like it, that's too bad. So here is the Socrates argument. P in this argument is his argument is more about how do we establish belief? How can we establish that a person believes, other than just taking their word for it? And his view is there is a way. And what you just do is you look at their life. How do they lead their lives? Do they follow the word of God? Do they obey what God demands? Then I think we can say that they are believers. We have evidence, or at least we have some reason. We have more reason than them just claiming it to say that, yeah, maybe that's something good. And so the argument Socrates would have would be still an if P then Q. But here's how it goes. If you obey the gods, then you can be shown to be a believer. That obedience to the gods, obedience to what the gods say, marks you as a person who believes in the gods. In fact, he'll say this a little later when we do what's sort of called the flute player analogy. But for right now, just sort of the structure of the argument is such like that. He says, if you obey the gods, that gives us reason to claim, yes, you believe the gods. Over there is no criterion for claiming belief. And so anybody can claim it with Meletus. And then not only can that happen, you end up with this invalid argument form. So what argument form is this going to be? Well, he has already begun making this argument earlier in the apology. He's going to continue making this argument. He's going to show that his life has been dedicated to obedience to the god. From the very moment that Chaerephon came back with the word from Apollo, no one is wiser than Socrates. This started Socrates on a path that for the rest of his life, he followed what he believed the god wanted him to do. And he did it unswervingly. He did it without any question. And so, yes, we can affirm P. And if we can affirm P after if P then Q, then the conclusion is, of course, we can affirm Q, that he is a believer. Therefore, the claim that he is an atheist can't stand if all you do, you look at Socrates' life, and he says, reason with me this way. And his reasoning, of course, you've seen this argument form before. I hope you have. Does it have a name? Or is it a little bastard with no name? Modus ponens. I hereby baptize thee, modus ponens. Yeah, modus ponens. So there we have the argument form that Socrates prefers to use. It's an argument form that tries to show that if you're going to make a claim that I'm not a believer over here, and you're going to use this kind of this poor argument form, then I've got something better for you. First of all, I can show you that I'm a believer, and then if you can see that I'm a believer from the way I've lived my life, then the story's closed, and this charge won't stand. This attempt to smear Socrates by calling him an atheist just won't stand. Socrates is pretty clever here, and like I said, there really is another part to this defense, and I'll bring that up just about now. And let's look at it. At about 27b4, we have sort of, I say, the last part of this argument against the second charge. But remember, the second charge is now sort of morphed into atheism. So the whole question about strange gods, etc., that's been put aside. Meletus sort of was going to take sort of going to double down on his bet and say, I can make the worst one stick. And Socrates believes he's got him on that. He can't make the worst charge, the charge of atheism, stick. So here we are at 27, as I said, 27b4. Does any man, Meletus, believe in human affairs who does not believe in human beings? Make him answer, not again and again create a disturbance. Apparently that jury's getting sort of rowdy and shouting and screaming stuff and, I don't know, throwing the remnants of lunch up on the stage, whatever it may be. Does any man who not believe in horses believe in equine affairs, or in flute music but not flute players? Tell me, my good sir. Well, he's offered three, you might say three analogies. Let's call this one the flute player analogy. We haven't done flute players in a while. Anyone here a flute player? Show me how to pucker and finger. Instead, let's call this the flute player analogy. I'll try to explain what he's talking about. He's saying, if you hear flute music, what can you infer? Well, there's a flute player around, right? I mean, it's pretty simple. I mean, if there's a flute player, I mean, if you hear flute music, then you can be pretty certain there's a flute player around. And as he said, if you simultaneously hear flute music and then say, there ain't no flute player, there's something wrong with something. And so The flute player analogy was merely here to sort of reinforce his argument. In other words, if you're saying, here's a person who gives evidence of obeying the gods, can you then turn around and say, yeah, he obeys the gods, he just doesn't believe in them? Huh? No, that sounds sort of a silly thing to do. Silly thing to claim. And also, if you don't believe in the gods, why in the hell would you obey them? And so the argument is, and the flute player analogy to reinforce the argument is that if you hear flute music, then you know there's a flute player. If you obey the gods, then at least we can say that you believe in those gods. It would be as preposterous as anything Meletus has done to simultaneously claim Socrates obeys the gods, and it would be difficult to deny that. It would be difficult looking at the record of Socrates' life, and everybody knew about, again and again, he did things that he felt Apollo required of him, so he was obeying the gods very strictly. It would be difficult to say, here's a person dedicated in his life to the gods, but he doesn't believe in the gods. Come on, that's crazy. And so he's trying to use, as a flute player analogy, a way of reinforcing this whole argument that he is putting up. So the flute player analogy is nothing more than, let's say, a more, metaphorical way of demonstrating this particular kind of argument that I tried to put up in a more formal way, because I thought a little formal argumenting isn't that bad. It's good for you sometimes. It's racing and exciting and other things. And this concludes this portion of the trial. Now, many people, many commentators, many people who have studied this, many students of Socrates and Plato, say that he did a really great job on these charges. And if he really wanted an acquittal, what the next thing he would have said was, the defense rests, and he would have sat down and gotten the book. But he didn't. And I think I may have mentioned earlier, back when we were still on speaking terms, a few weeks ago, you may remember I said that one of the reasons for his participation in the trial was not just to answer the charges, but to try to explain to Athens why he lived the life he did, why he became, let's say, prominent, maybe for undesirable characteristics. And he doesn't feel, apparently, that he's done a complete job of that. He wants to explain his life. He wants to just give an accounting of who he is and why he is this person. And just answering the charges was not enough. And so he continues to stand up there even after he has answered the charges. And many people think that with each paragraph he utters, he just erodes away whatever good work he did in answering the charges and starts digging a hole for himself deeper and deeper, a hole from which he doesn't ever get out. So let's look at this for the next few minutes or so. Look at make a little headway into this part of it, because it's a different part of the apology. Now he is just freelancing it. He's not going to talk to Meletus anymore. He's going to try to explain why a girl like him got to be a girl like him. And so we'll just come along for the ride. At 28b3, he produces he has a lot of hypotheticals in there. He'll say, well, maybe one of you would think this, or maybe one of you would say this. No one has said this, but he's trying to say, if this is on your mind, let me answer this question, even though it hasn't been asked. Someone might say, are you not ashamed, Socrates, to have followed the kind of occupation that has led you to now being in danger of death? Now, this is similar to one thing he said before, sort of, you might say, the nonconformist argument. It's just a slightly different way of saying, why did you do such crazy stuff like being a philosopher? Don't you know being a philosopher is not something that anybody likes? Nobody likes philosophers. Everybody hates philosophers. Same thing today. So, if your mother's like my mother, she's dead now. I'm hoping your mother's not dead, by the way. That's not the way I'm hoping she's like my mother. But that she will probably, nag you endlessly if you have to become a philosophy major about, why do you have to do this? Why couldn't you? So anyway, Socrates kind of explained to his mom now why he became a philosopher, and why he's just sort of strange. You're wrong, sir, if you think that a man who is any good at all should take into account the risk of life or death. He should look only to this in his actions, whether what he does is right or wrong, whether he's acting like a good or a bad man. This is going to be a part of sort of an ongoing theme of the rest of the apology, sort of his talking about death, because it seems as if he has become, as the trial moves on, if not fixated on death. At the very least, it's in the front of his mind. The fact that, he may die. This may be the end of it. And he is sort of, in some sense, making, maybe making mental preparations for that. But he's also thinking out loud. He is saying that whatever you do, if you have a choice between doing the right thing and risking life, and doing the wrong thing but prolonging your life, you should always do the former. You should always avoid the latter, because the question is not, will I live longer? The question is, will I be a good person? Follow the action that makes you a good person. Don't follow the action that may add a few more days or years or months to your life. Follow the action in which you are a good person, in which you're doing the right thing. And so he is saying to this hypothetical person who never asked him the question, the very fact that I'm acting in a way that endangers my life, if I think I'm doing the right thing, then endangering my life is no big deal. I would much rather, it would be a much bigger deal if I betrayed my values and betrayed my character just to get a few more months or years of life. And so he is trying to explain that no matter what you think of him, one thing you can't think of him is that he's going to be a betrayer of his integrity, a betrayer of his values. He may die, but he is not going to back down on what he knows to be right. So he wants to, in some sense, almost put the jury on notice about that. And just further on down, at 28D5, this is the truth of the matter, gentlemen of the jury. Wherever a man has taken a position he believes to be best, or has been placed by his commander, there he must, I think, remain and face danger without a thought for death or anything else rather than disgrace. Now, there are two things here that he is alluding to, and the jury knows what he's talking about. We may not know exactly the two allusions he is talking about. His commander, that's the key deal. One, of course, you can probably guess, that's Apollo. I mean, he sees Apollo as his commander, not like Apollo 13, Commander Lovell or whoever we're talking about. The god Apollo is his commander in that he sees God, the god Apollo, as directing all of his activities, and he does what the god wants him to do. So he believes he has been placed in this unique position in this city, Athens, by Apollo, and saying, do this as long as you can. Make people think for themselves. Get people to take chances intellectually and think things through more carefully. This is what Apollo, he believes, is directing him, ordering him to do. So when he talks about being placed there by his commander, he is again reiterating the thought that he is following the gods, and therefore it can't, the god of the city, one of the most important gods of the city. So therefore it can't be reconciled with a claim of atheism. If you're going to claim he is an atheist, then you got to find some way to keep him from following Apollo, who apparently made his wishes fairly clear, or at least clear enough for Socrates' satisfaction. And so he is saying that I don't care what you do to me, but my commander, Apollo, has placed me here, and that's what I'm going to do. Well, that's just the first meaning of it, because he was well known, because he was a prominent citizen, that during the Peloponnesian War, he was a soldier, and he fought very bravely, very bravely. He got commendations from the front. People sent letters back about how wonderful he was, where sometimes a whole portion of the army, when being charged by the Spartans, turned tail and ran, and he and just a few other people stood their ground, fought off the Spartans, and then eventually people came back and fought with him as well when they saw that the line was going to hold. And apparently Socrates did some extraordinarily wonderful things. He wasn't a war hero, because the war heroes in those times were essentially self-promoters. Alcibiades, I think I talked a little bit about Alcibiades last time. Alcibiades was a war hero mainly because he wrote his own commendations and sent them back, and so it worked out pretty well. Actually, Alcibiades wrote one for Socrates when he still had the hots for Socrates. So that, But in spite of all these things, Socrates was known to be a war hero, or not a war hero, known to be a very brave soldier. And so it was known that when the commander said, hold this line, Sox, Sox would hold the line. I mean, Sox would fight and kill and do whatever he had to do, but he was placed there by that commander, the military commander. So he is using the whole sense that my honor and doing the right thing is much more important than my life. If my life has to end because of this trial, but I know I've done the right thing, I accept that. I could never accept myself not doing the right thing, but he says, if this is the way it's got to be. So he's sort of letting the jury, in some sense, taking a little bit out of their hands, taking maybe the power they have over him. Because the jury, everybody would know, the jury has the power to life or death, to guilty or acquittal, death or some other kind of a sentence. And by saying, I don't give a damn whether they put me to death or not, I've done the right thing, I'm satisfied, Apollo's satisfied, what you do, who cares? I mean, that sort of takes power out of the hands of the jury. Now, the jury's not going to like that, because one of the things that was very common in Athenian trials, and most of the trials in the ancient world anyway, was that you were expected, both sides were expected, both the prosecution and the defense was expected to kiss up to the jury. I mean, flatter them, I mean, call them, you know, the virile flower of Athenian manhood, or whatever the hell it was. You make up what, and there's nothing too preposterous in praise that a jury hasn't heard it and expects to hear it. And if you don't kiss up to the jury, if you don't flatter them, you don't just bend over or have them bend over and you massage, then you're not doing what is expected of you. And what's expected of you is to prostrate yourself in front of the jury and say, oh, I am such a miserable scoundrel. Please have mercy upon me, you great and beautiful and wonderful people who uphold and this outstanding city better than any other jury ever has. That kind of, you can just make it up as you go along, as long as it makes it sound like the jury is the most wonderful thing in the world. And, okay, they've surrounded the room now.
Won't be long.
It won't be long, the anthrax will come in through these vents. We won't be able to get out. If it's going to be anthrax, the only known antidote is crotch water.
I'll use it as he is.
I alone will be saved.
Well, between that and crotch water, I think I'll gladly pick it.
Yeah, I think the anthrax fits you better. So, you're expected to kiss up to the jury, and what Socrates seems to be doing is the opposite. He is saying, essentially, I don't respect your power over me because you don't have any. Because I'm prepared to die, because I know I've done the right thing. And if I'm going to die, it's okay with me. The jury now doesn't have the power to coerce or do anything other than say, what the hell are you doing, pal? So that's a rather interesting thing, I suppose. Why don't we start at about 29A next time, shall we? Hiya, Grace.
Hey.
We're about to get people out of here. Shall we kick their asses out, or should I keep talking?
No, keep talking.
Keep talking. Okay.
I probably don't know what you're talking about.
You know what I'm talking about. You've had this class before.
Well, I may not have been here for it.
Well, yeah, and yeah. You know Casey, do you? Yeah, because he's here, but he's about as absent as you were when you were not here. So.
That's pretty absent.
Well, why don't we let's call this off and start next time on 29A. I know you're going to show up when I brought food.
What?